All right, here is our fun video lecture on what exactly is a literature review. I'm gonna be giving you a lot of content, so hopefully your brain doesn't explode. But this will kind of walk you through the expectations of a literature review and kind of hopefully helping you understand it a bit better. So to start off with, I'm going to tell you what a literature review is not, because this is what I often see from students who are attempting a literature review for the first time. It's totally understandable. It kind of, in your head, it might make sense like, oh, I have to tell you about all these articles in one little combined document. But there's again, a certain dance to, to literature reviews. So things to remember that a literature review is not. This is not a list of article summaries. This is the biggest thing that I see when students write literature reviews for the first time. So I'm trying to save you a lot of revision time. What I am not looking for, and what literature reviews in general are not looking for, is just saying, in this article by so-and-so, they state blah, 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 blah. And then in this other article by so-and-so, he states blah, 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 blah. That is going to give you a summary. That is not going to show the critical thinking and the synthesizing of information. I'm going to walk through what summarizing and synthesizing are in later slides. But if you take anything away from this lecture, a literature review is not a list of article summaries. This is also not a personal opinion paper. We want to stay away from the use of, I think this, we see this. That is important, but it's not the purpose. This is an academic conversation. You are talking about what other literature says, and we are not looking for your opinion or your viewpoints on their articles in here. This is not a report on just one study. This is bringing all different literature together and identifying what they have in common. And this is also not a place to argue what should be done. Again, you are just responsible for reviewing the literature that is out there without interjecting your opinions or your thoughts on it. It might be very tempting to, because you might feel passionate about what someone said, or you might hate what somebody said, but you need to check yourself and focus on what the purpose is. It's reviewing the literature and the commonalities and the gaps that's already out there. And then that will lead into why your research question that you're proposing to study on is important to the conversation. So remember, don't summarize the articles, don't interject your opinions, and make sure it's more than just one study. So what it is, it summarizes, synthesizes actually might be a better word there, existing research on a topic. You're comparing findings across studies, common themes, looking for gaps, and then justifying why your topic matters in social work practice. So it's kind of just taking that next step of critical thinking around literature. You're not just regurgitating statements about what's out there. You're finding the connections, you're bringing it all together, and you're creating this conversation around literature versus just telling me what literature says. Or not just me, but your audience. So how does this actually work? I like to think of literature reviews as listening before we speak. So us speaking is kind of that second part of our research project. The research that we've done, our analysis of our data, our recommendations, that's when we speak. Literature reviews are doing the listening before we even get to enter into the conversation. So the purpose of a literature review, and I really liked this, I pulled this from the textbook, that it's not to test your intuition, your personal experience, or empathy. So it's not, we could put a question out. So like, let's say you wanted to research the impact of having divorced parents on a child's emotional well-being in adulthood. I don't know. You might have personal experience around this. You might have an idea of how it might impact just based on what you've observed, your own ideas, your own thoughts. And those are good things, but it's not for you, again, to tell us what you think you know, or what you believe you know, or what you've experienced. It's looking at the literature that's already out there. You're learning about the specific and articulatable facts to inform social work action or even if you're doing research outside of social work, to inform your audience about the topic that you are going to research. So you can see this whole study process as you entering into an academic conversation. And before you would enter into any conversation, not everybody, but it's you. Usually, if you're thinking about joining a conversation, you first want to listen to what's being said before interjecting your opinion so you don't look like an idiot. So this literature review is helping you listen to what the topic is, figuring out what issues are being debated, and determining who is responding and how. That way you can enter the conversation in looking competent and not like a fool or someone who has no idea and they're just spewing information. So because before you can suggest how to help a client or a community, you want to listen again to what other social workers and researchers have learned. Don't reinvent the wheel. They've done the work for you. They have credible information that you can use to build. You want to look for patterns, not just one story. You might find an article that you really, really, really like. You can't base your whole research project off one article. You want to look for other patterns to validate that what you're researching is actually important. You want to notice where people agree, disagree, or if they're missing voices in the conversation. So again, it's a lot. You're taking all these articles and you're not just reading them, but you're thinking about them, and that can feel overwhelming, can feel annoying. It might feel exciting, all these different feelings, but it's pretty intensive because you are being forced to think really critically about all these different things that you're reading. So it's okay to feel a little overwhelmed going into this, but I'm going to provide you a structure of what should be included in a literature review to kind of help wrap your mind around how to approach this piece of your research study. So a good literature review structure kind of follows this format. It will introduce your audience to the topic. So you'll have an introductory paragraph. Then you'll kind of have the body of your literature review. This is taking the literature and usually grouping them by themes. There's different approaches to how you can structure a literature review. You can do it by themes, by dates, by types of literature that you read. The easiest way is to research it and organize it by themes. I think this will make it way more understandable to approach it, and it also will kind of alleviate some of the hopefully overwhelming feelings. So you're gonna, in the body, group it by research themes. You can compare some studies. You kind of want to look at gaps in the literature. Maybe there wasn't a lot researched on this specific thing, or some implications that you drew from it. And then you're going to wrap it up by doing a conclusion. We're going to walk through these different steps to kind of help it make it feel a little bit better. So with your introduction, you want to use this section to set the stage for why this topic matters to your audience. You want to hook them in. Now, there's that fine balance between using overly emotional language and biased, subjective language, but you really want to be like, here is why this is important for you to care about my study. So you really want to start with that problem statement, which should kind of answer the following questions. You want to just lay it out there why this is an important problem to study. If you're able to figure out how many people are affected by the problem specifically, that's great. You might be more general. So since we're doing college students, you can maybe throw in some information about the number of college students that are out there. I don't know. If it affects a lot of people, the more likely that your reader is going to be hooked because they might be affected by it, or they might see that this is a staggering issue and we really want to learn more about it. That kind of ties into how does this problem impact the populations or other populations? So why does this matter? And then what is the target? What is your target? Why? It's supposed to say why. Why is your target population important one to study? So you are kind of setting the stage, getting your readers interested and kind of validating why we're actually talking about this. So a strong introduction problem statement should be filled with facts, theory, and arguments based on the literature you found. So this, again, isn't you just telling them why. You're backing it with research that you have found to show why this is an important topic to study. You want to be mindful that you don't spend the entire time of your literature review. Again, this is like 5 to 7 pages. You don't want your entire literature review just to be the introduction to the topic. A good rule of thumb is to not spend more than a paragraph or two for the problem statement. So the introduction is a little bit bigger than the problem statement. Problem statement kind of focuses on these things. But in the introduction as a whole, there should be a statement or statements about the overall topic. It should define or identify the general topic area of concern, the issue. You might want to pull in historical background. And then you kind of want to give a few sentences that walk the reader through the rest of the literature review. So kind of, here's what we're going to discuss these themes, blah, blah, blah. Highlight your main arguments from the body of the literature and preview your conclusion. And an introduction should let someone know what to expect from the rest of the review. So this is very, very similar to an abstract. Not quite as brief as an abstract and not quite as summary-based as an abstract. But it's along the general vein of an abstract. It's kind of setting the stage, identifying why it's a problem, why it's important to talk about, and then what the reader can kind of expect in your literature review. And then we get to the body. This is where the work is really, really done. The introduction and the conclusion are really crafted based on what you put into the body of your literature. So a good place to start is group the research by themes. Don't, again, go article by article. Do a heading of themes. So if we were going to be talking about the impact of COVID on college students' mental health, one topic might be anxiety. Sources of anxiety, financial strain. So if we found in articles that one of the biggest causes of mental health distress post-COVID is financial concerns because, I don't know, I'm making research up in my head. You would do a theme and then you would talk about how all these different articles spoke to that theme. It is not a good idea to organize your literature review by source. Again, I'm going to reiterate this over and over. So that would look like one paragraph talks about source A, the next paragraph talks about source B. No, you want to do it themes and then use pieces from each source to highlight that theme. By doing what I said, going article by article, that only provides a good summary of literature, but gives you no synthesis of the literature. So let's talk about what summarizing versus synthesizing is. So summarizing is just restating the main ideas, finding or arguments of a single source in your own words. So this is typically what we see in a lot of research papers. You found the source, you're telling your audience what this source says. Key elements of summarizing, just go one source at a time, focuses on what the author says. It's very descriptive rather than analytical, so you're not really kind of fleshing out the bigger picture of the article. You're just giving what the article says and kind of highlighting what the author is trying to say. Again, that's good stuff, but it's not what a literature review is looking for. We're looking for synthesizing. So what synthesizing is, you're integrating multiple sources to show the patterns, showing what they all agree on, what they disagree on, and what other gaps might be present in the literature. So the key elements of synthesizing information is taking those multiple sources into a conversation with each other. So how does source A either support source B, or how does it disagree with source B? We're taking things and putting those pieces together, focusing on how ideas relate. There's much more critical thinking and analysis when you're doing synthesizing. And the way to show that then is organizing it by themes versus authors. So hopefully that helps a little bit understand the direction you have to go. So think of it this way. So let's say you attended a conference and you listened to a bunch of people present on the same topic. So you went to a conference talking about how to address homelessness in Kent County. And so you went to all these different sessions. Each presenter had a different perspective on the topic, a different theme around the topic, a different maybe methodology, a different intervention. You learned all of this information on one topic. And when you're done with the conference, let's say you had to go to this for a class or something, you take all of your notes on the topic, you identify themes and ideas, kind of say like, this is what I learned. This is the kind of what I heard from a lot of speakers. The report you would write on the conference, in a sense, would be a literature review, because you kind of took everything that you learned, and instead of telling me presenter by presenter what you learned, you gave me an overview and how each different presenter supported what you found, and maybe what you were missing from the conversation, and you wish a speaker would have talked on. That, in sense, is a literature review. So kind of building on that, you're in the body, you're going to compare those research studies that have varying viewpoints. You might not always find this in your literature. Maybe this is all a very agreed upon topic. This isn't necessarily something that has to be in it, but if you're able to find varying viewpoints, it really gives some depth to your literature review, because it's showing that you're thinking about all different perspectives and not just one. You're not limiting yourself to focusing on one specific thing. There might be authors who disagree on it, and that brings some depth to your literature review, because you can say, like, well, this person thinks one thing, this person thinks the other. Our research study is going to help maybe clarify the discrepancies that we see going on. That is, again, similar to this, identifying gaps or limitations of the literature you found. So no topic has actually ever been 100% researched. We're always learning new things. World is changing. We're a dynamic society. We're not static. So there's always something something more to learn. So it's okay to critique what's out there already and be like, hey, this is good, but this is what I'm missing. That's not offensive. That is critical thinking. So when you're gathering all your literature together, you might consider, is there populations that are not represented? Are there different methods? So it's just all qualitative data, not quantitative. Maybe we need to find more quantitative to understand it better. The different contexts, so that kind of goes back to, is it studied abroad, but not necessarily in the United States? Those are the gaps and the limitations that we're kind of looking for to have a discussion around. So after that's like the whole body, that's a lot of work, but that's kind of where your focus will initially be, because then the conclusion will help you transition into your research study. So in this conclusion, you're going to restate your problem that you were kind of focusing on in the literature review, and how all of that information that you found in your literature review led you to conduct the specific study that you are going to be doing. What I like to see, and I think it's really helpful, because you will have to create a specific research question, because you have to know what you're studying or you're implementing for your research project. At the end of the conclusion of your literature review, I think it's always helpful to state the research question that the rest of your study will be addressing. Kind of gives that flow. So this whole literature review is at the beginning of your whole research proposal and the study, because it's going to give your audience kind of the orientation into the topic you're studying, and that will then eventually lead you into saying, well, this is the exact question that we're studying. Here's what we did. Again, a lot of information. So just a few reminders about literature reviews. You're going to avoid using I and we language, because again, this is not intended to show your opinions, personal thoughts, and biases. It's an academic conversation that should be written in that scholarly, clinical, third-person voice. Again, if you don't take anything away from this lecture, take this away. Synthesize, don't summarize. That is not what a literature review is. Synthesize, synthesize, synthesize. And at the end of the day, if this feels hard, then you're doing it right. It is a lot of thinking, and this is good thinking. It's helping our brains grow and mold and prepare us for social work practice if we're thinking critically. So if it feels hard, you are in fact doing it right. So the last slide is just writing and organizing a review. When you are entering into looking at all these different sources that you are finding, try to answer the following questions. What do you consider to be the most important theories and perspectives rising from all this literature? What are you really seeing discussed? How have these affected your understanding of the topic? Has it pissed you off, or has it made you think more deeply about it? If it made you angry, explore why. What is this about? Do I need to change my topic? Do I need to continue digging to help me understand why people are opposing it? That type of thing. You always want to keep in mind your research question. How does it link with the knowledge that we're finding in the literature? Obviously, you want your literature to support the reason why you're researching this topic. Are there questions that are raised in the literature that your study addresses? Has anyone done this before? Are there partial answers? And in what way will your topic has the literature made your topic valid, important, and actually doable? How will your research study add to the literature? So keeping those things in mind, if you're finding a big disconnect between literature and your research question, then we maybe have to revise our approach to the research question or continue finding different research. If there's a disconnect, it's going to feel clunky and it's not going to really validate your study. You want to make sure that what you are going to be spending your time researching does have literature and evidence to support that it is important conversation to have. Hopefully that makes sense. And thank you, SlidesGo, for giving me the template. I have to give them credit. Yeah, that's literature reviews. Get excited.